That's exactly right. So the chickens are coming home to roost, and it's looking really ugly. The situation we're facing this winter, with bills potentially of £400 to £500 per month on average, means that people will not be able to pay them. The government is going to have to kick in with a new welfare system to cover this short-term supply crisis, we hope. But it could linger possibly for 1 or 2 years if they don't make the right decisions now. And it is about supply. So the only sustained way to get energy bills down in the long run is by building more stuff. It doesn't really matter what stuff, provided it all works when you fit it together. So gas is vital. We've got a gas supply crisis globally. The only solution to that is more gas. And the decisions that the government has taken in the last decade to deliberately throttle the North Sea, to put a ban on fracking onshore, means that we are in a terrible position when where we should be is as a supplier to the rest of Europe. We could be helping Germany today to fight Vladimir Putin. Instead, we're in the position we are begging the Belgians to bail us out in the middle of summer. Now, by winter, if we haven't got moving on that, it's going to be even worse.
Yeah.
Everybody's after the same supplies.
So, Andy, I fully agree with you on both of those points, but many of my viewers will be looking at the news reports on the energy companies making these vast profits and actually growing quite fat on this energy crisis. Is that just? Is that right? Should we not nationalise these key industries?
Well, if nationalisation was a solution to anything, then we'd be looking at all of the things today that are run by politicians and thinking that's fantastic. And the NHS, best health system in the world, well, clearly it isn't. We'd be looking at the national grid and saying they've done a brilliant job of getting ready for the green energy transition, and frankly, they haven't. And so it goes on. I mean, if you could imagine Grant Shapps running Shell, do we think he'd be doing a better job of getting more oil and gas on the grid, or would he be spending all of his time making excuses for the fact that he can't deal with strikers? I think it's self-evident that nationalisation is no solution whatsoever. It's just a sticking plaster populist policy that, to be clear, when Jeremy Corbyn stuck it as his major idea for that election in which he didn't do very well, what happened was that people pointed out very quickly that he would have to spend billions of pounds of taxpayers' money buying these companies. And that would then be going either on taxes or on bills. So the short-term effect of nationalisation is to make the cost of living crisis much, much worse.
Yeah, but Andy, there is a hell of a lot of opposition. Both the candidates have said, yep, I'm for fracking as long as local communities, local areas are for it. But you see, we've discussed on this show many times before the fact that there are movements against building new homes, there are movements against fracking in areas. You're not going to be able to actually get support from the country for these measures, are you?
Yeah, I agree with you to a point. I mean, it would be lovely to believe that the thing that's stopping people approving new housing developments is simply that they're not getting enough personal benefit from it. But in reality, we all know that NIMBY campaigns are irrational. People oppose the opening of a bag of crisps where I live in Surrey, let alone fracking, let alone solar farms, let alone wind farms and nuclear power stations. So there is things the government could do in line with this new idea of community consent. If we look at the fracking regime that should have happened, in it was built a £100,000 incentive for each new site and a 1% community benefit levy, which probably would have gone to the local council. Well, we know the industry will let that rise and to get things moving. And what could happen is that money could be distributed directly to people to reduce their bills or for whatever other purpose they like. So if we apply that from fracking to all of the energy technologies, let's have something similar for new wind farms. Let's have it for solar farms. Let's have it for nuclear power stations. Let the community benefit. And then maybe you'll see communities that really want to have that benefit adopt these schemes.
But then, as far as supply is concerned right now, in this moment, you're right that I think the industries like North Sea, oil and gas, they must have whiplash, Andy, at the breakneck speed at which the government have done a complete reversal on their policies, which have been pretty anti these industries, where we've been told that, you know, net zero is rolling down the tracks and don't worry, love, we'll power your gas boiler through these wind turbines. It's just not possible. So do you think these industries actually, whilst we lambast them for the profits and things that they make, they actually don't know whether they're coming or going?
Well, I think the lambasting is a cheap shot from politicians normally who are just trying to make themselves popular through other people's misery. What we need these companies to do is invest in new sources of supply. So Centrica, for example, was in the press this week for their profits. They're investing potentially £2 billion in the Rough field for gas storage. And they're doing so on the basis that could then be converted into hydrogen storage, which is essential if we want intermittent wind power to actually be backed up. Now, do we want them using that $2 billion to do that? Or do we want them giving cash handouts to their customers? I think there's a very clear answer to that.
But Andy, a lot of people are saying, well, hang on, if you look at fossil fuels, the cost of fossil fuels, and you compare that with renewable technologies like wind, like solar, that actually the new technologies, the green technologies, are cheaper right now than the fossil fuels. So why shouldn't we be going hell for leather on those things?
Well, we should always be going hell for leather on a fair carbon price and then letting the technologies fight it out with each other. What we shouldn't be doing, and particularly not politicians, is picking winners, or more often in energy, picking losers. So the nuclear power decisions, for example, if we look at Hinkley Point, it's a disaster. It's going to cost 68 to 120 billion pounds, according to the government's own estimates. That's not affordable. And the new Sizewell C plant that's been approved, same technology, the same technology which is rusting in France and caused the company that's behind it to be bailed out by the French government. Why on earth are we doing that? So what we should be doing instead is saying, OK, we think it's fair to tackle climate change, that the carbon price is something like what it is in the system at the moment, which is about £80 per tonne of CO2, or whatever the figure is. And anything that's more expensive than that, we're not going to build it. Fossil fuels are perfectly capable of covering the gap in the interim. This temporary supply shock will be overcome. But it is also a result of deliberate policy to restrict supply. So the only thing we can do in the short term is import more fossil fuels. And everybody's trying to do it at the moment. You see Macron hosting Saudi Arabia this week, for example. So
even President Biden, of course, he was saying 2 minutes ago, he was saying he wouldn't have anything to do with the Saudis. And now, of course, he's courting them, you know, like Cinderella trying to find her slipper.
Yeah, ethical foreign policy is often a casualty of reality. And in reality, we need the oil and gas. And we're going to need it for 20 to 30 years in any sort of low-carbon transition strategy. Well, let's make sure that we're profiting from that. We have some of the best resources of oil and gas in the world. We can be helping our near neighbours. We need to drill it now. We need to get the regulations out of the way. We need to streamline permitting. It's not either or with the renewables. It's both. And let's have them working together so one offsets the other.
So, Andy, the Labour Party have said that net zero is at the heart of any economic policy that they would implement in government. Now, I'm wondering, is it your view that actually an economic policy that pursues net zero is ultimately one that's going to lead us to be both colder and poorer?
I think you've got to separate two things. There's mundane net zero, the science, which is to arrest global warming, you need net zero emissions. Yeah, that's obvious. And then there's net zero, the ideology, which is where Labour and some Conservatives have gone, which is we must achieve net zero in the United Kingdom, regardless of what the rest of the world do, at any cost. That's mad. And what that means is we are paying here for other people to emit carbon elsewhere. And that's got to stop. The reality of the situation is no government is going to jeopardise security of supply to hit the net zero target. No government is going to force a cost of living crisis on us for a sustained period to hit the net zero target. That's the honest position. The politicians should start saying it and stop pandering to teenage activists and people lobbying for particular technologies with all this ridiculous ideology.